The scent of absence. Could a house smell of what was no longer there? Kenji Tanaka believed so. 2 years had passed since Emi, his wife of 45 years, had faded like the last stroke of an ink painting, yet her presence lingered, or rather the sharp, hollow echo of her absence did. It clung to the polished wood of the corridor, settled in the dust motes dancing in the autumn light, slanting through the shoji screens, and resided most profoundly in the silence. His small, traditional house in Kanazawa, once a haven of quiet companionship, now felt vast, its orderliness mocking his solitude. He was 72, a retired restorer of Wajimanuri lacquerware. Decades spent hunched over intricate patterns, coaxing life back into fractured beauty with infinite patience, had left him with a slight stoop and hands that, though weathered, retained a surgeon's steadiness. His workshop, adjacent to the main house, lay dormant, tools meticulously arranged, the unique, sweet-sharp scent of urushi lacquer long faded, replaced by the sterile smell of disuse. He missed the focus, the absorption, the way time dissolved when faced with a delicate repair. Now time stretched before him, an endless expanse of meticulously prepared solitary meals and the quiet tending of a bonsai pine whose miniature endurance felt like a silent reproach. His daughter, Yumi, called dutifully from Tokyo once a week. Her voice, bright and busy, skimmed over the surface of his quiet life, her concern genuine but distant, wrapped in the demands of her own career and family. He murmured reassurances, careful not to burden her with the weight of his emptiness. What could she do after all? Loneliness was not a problem to be solved, but a state to be endured. One crisp November afternoon, returning from a solitary walk along the canal, its surface ruffled by a cool breeze carrying the scent of decaying maple leaves, he noticed a flyer tacked to the community notice board near the old temple. Shodo Club, Japanese calligraphy. Beginner's welcome. Tuesdays and Fridays. He paused, the image of black ink flowing onto white paper strangely appealing. It spoke of discipline, focus, perhaps even a different kind of silence. One filled with intention rather than emptiness. He'd always admired the art form, the balance of strength and grace in a well-executed character. Hesitation, a familiar companion born of shyness and the inertia of grief, held him back. But the silence of the house waiting for him felt heavier than usual. Perhaps, he murmured to the crisp air, the word barely audible, perhaps just a quiet distraction. He carefully noted the details. Current part characters, 2E998. Total characters, 2E998. The following Tuesday, Kenji found himself standing outside the designated room in the community center, the scent of old tatami mats and faint jasmine tea mingling in the air. He smoothed down his simple dark jacket, his heart thrumming with an unfamiliar anxiety. Taking a deep breath, he slid open the door. Several older adults were already seated on cushions before low tables, preparing their materials, inkstones, brushes, paperweights. The atmosphere was one of quiet concentration, punctuated by soft murmurs and the rhythmic sound of ink sticks being ground. It was less intimidating than he'd feared. He found an empty spot near the back, bowing slightly to the room in general greeting. The instructor, a serene woman with kind eyes, guided the beginners through the basics, posture, breathing, holding the brush. Kenji found a surprising solace in the ritual, the focused movements, pushing aside the fog of his thoughts. His first attempts were clumsy, the ink bleeding unevenly, the lines shaky. Yet the act itself, the connection of hand, breath, and ink, felt grounding. During a short break for tea, a woman seated nearby turned to him with a warm, open smile. "First time?" she asked. Her face was kind, framed by soft grey hair, her movements practical and unfussy. "I'm Haruito. I live just down the street. Run the little tea shop, maybe you know it." "Tanaka Kenji," he replied, bowing his head slightly. "Yes, I believe I do. A pleasure to meet you, Ito-san." Her simple friendliness was a balm. Before he could say more, another presence made itself known. A woman approached their tables, moving with a fluid grace that instantly commanded attention. She was dressed in a tasteful dove-grey kimono, her posture perfect, her smile gentle and refined. "Tanaka-san, forgive my intrusion. I couldn't help but notice your concentration earlier. It's wonderful to see new members embracing Shodo." Her voice was soft, melodious. "Sato Akiko," she introduced herself, offering a graceful bow. "Your strokes, even as a beginner, have a certain deliberate quality, a strength." Kenji felt a flush creep up his neck. "You are too kind, Sato-san. I am merely fumbling." "Not at all," she insisted, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that felt both flattering and slightly unnerving. "One can often see a person's history in their brushwork. Have you perhaps worked with your hands in a detailed craft before?" Surprised by her perception, Kenji admitted, "I used to restore lacquerware. Wajimanuri." Akiko Sato's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, keen interest, crossing her elegant features. "Ah, Wajimanuri! Such a precious art! Demanding infinite patience and skill. How fascinating! We must talk more about it sometime." She gave another graceful bow and moved away, leaving Kenji feeling strangely observed, a warmth spreading through him that was equal parts pleasure and nascent caution. The session resumed, but his focus was subtly altered, the black ink now seeming to hold new, complex shades. Kenji began attending the Shudder Club regularly. The rhythm of grinding ink, the focused breathing, the attempt to capture balance and flow on paper became anchors in his week. He found himself looking forward to Tuesdays and Fridays, not just for the practice, but for the quiet hum of shared activity and the brief conversations. His interactions with Haru Ito were simple and comforting. She'd offer a quiet comment on the changing weather, share a seasonal sweet like kurimanju from her shop, or simply nod with understanding when his brushstrokes went awry. Her presence was grounding, uncomplicated. Akiko Sato, however, offered something different. She sought him out before or after class, her conversation always engaging, her appreciation for art seemingly profound. She spoke knowledgeably about ceramics, textiles, and, of course, lacquerware. She lamented the fading of traditional skills, praised Kenji's dedication to such a demanding craft, and listened with rapt attention when he spoke hesitantly about his former work. She had a way of making him feel seen, understood, his past life validated in a way it hadn't been since Emmy's passing. The frost of his loneliness began to thaw under the warmth of her attention. They sometimes shared tea after class in the center's small lounge. Akiko spoke of her late husband, a university professor, hinting at a life of quiet refinement now tinged with a gentle melancholy that mirrored his own. Her empathy felt genuine, her companionship easy. He found himself sharing more than he intended, anecdotes about Emmy, the challenges of restoration, the quiet satisfaction of bringing a damaged piece back to life. Yet subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, the focus of her inquiries began to shift. The materials for Wajimanuri, she mused one afternoon, stirring her tea, the urushi lacquer itself, the gold powders, they must have become incredibly expensive over the years? Indeed, Kenji acknowledged. Quality requires investment. And the finished pieces, she continued, her gaze distant as if contemplating beauty, especially older, masterfully restored ones, their value must be considerable in today's market. Collectors pay fortunes for such heritage, don't they? Kenji felt a faint prickle of unease. Value is subjective, Sato-san. For me, the satisfaction was in the process, the history. Of course, she agreed quickly, her smile warm. But still, one reads about auctions. It's fascinating how these tangible pieces of history accrue such monetary worth. She changed the subject then, talking about a recent exhibition of ukiyo-e prints, but the slight dissonance lingered in Kenji's mind. Another time, discussing the rising cost of living for seniors, she sighed delicately. It's a worry, isn't it? Especially for those living alone. Property taxes in Kanazawa are not insignificant, and unexpected expenses. A dear friend of mine recently faced enormous medical bills for her grandchild. Such burdens can appear so suddenly. Her eyes held a look of profound sympathy, yet Kenji couldn't shake the feeling that the comment was somehow directed, a gentle probe into his own circumstances veiled in general concern. He murmured a polite agreement, shifting uncomfortably on his cushion. The warmth he felt in her company was becoming mingled with a subtle, persistent chill. Current part, characters, 3,492. Total characters, 998. The chill deepened over the following weeks. Akiko's inquiries, always couched in elegant phrasing and apparent empathy, began circling more consistently around themes of value, inheritance, and financial security. She might mention an article about estate planning, asking his opinion with polite curiosity. Or she'd admire a piece of calligraphy equipment, a particularly fine inkstone, an antique paperweight, and casually inquire about its provenance or rarity, her appreciation seeming to shade into assessment. Kenji, trained by decades of meticulous work to notice the smallest inconsistencies, the subtlest shifts in texture or sheen, started applying that same scrutiny, almost unconsciously, to Akiko Sato. He noticed how her eyes, despite her soft words of artistic appreciation, seemed to calculate when discussing valuable crafts. He observed a fleeting tightness around her mouth when he spoke of living simply or finding contentment in non-material things. There was a discrepancy between her tatame, the refined, empathetic facade, and faint, unsettling glimpses of an underlying hone, a hidden reality or motive. One afternoon, Haruito lingered as Kenji was packing away his brushes. She held out a small, imperfectly shaped yokan, a sweet bean jelly. "From my cousin in Kyoto," she said simply. "Not factory perfect, but made with good heart." As Kenji thanked her, she added quietly, looking not at him but at the ink-stained cloth he was folding, "Sometimes, Tanaka-san, the things that look plainest hold the truest flavor. Appearances, they can hide a bitter taste, no?" She offered a small, knowing smile and took her leave. Her words, oblique yet resonant, settled in Kenji's mind. Was it a general observation or a gentle warning? He couldn't be sure, but it amplified his own burgeoning caution. He started becoming more reserved in his conversations with Akiko, deflecting personal questions with polite vagueness, steering the talk back to calligraphy or the weather. He also noticed Akiko subtly inquiring about other members of the Shodo Club. A brief question about where someone lived, a comment on a piece of jewelry another woman wore, a seemingly casual remark about someone mentioning a recent expensive trip. It wasn't overt gossip, but rather a quiet gathering of information, a mapping of the social landscape that felt purposeful. Then came a small but telling inconsistency. Akiko had previously mentioned her late husband being a professor of Japanese literature, but one day, lamenting the difficulty of understanding modern technology, she let slip a comment about "my husband, poor man, always struggled even with the accounting for his small business." She corrected herself quickly, laughing it off as a slip of the tongue, confusing him with her brother perhaps. But Kenji registered the discrepancy. But one day, lamenting the difficulty of understanding modern technology, she let slip a comment about "my husband, poor man, always struggled even with the accounting for his small business." She corrected herself quickly, laughing it off as a slip of the tongue, confusing him with her brother perhaps, but it was minor, perhaps meaningless. Or perhaps it was a crack in the carefully constructed facade. The feeling of unease solidified into active suspicion. He enjoyed the shared interest, the escape from solitude her company provided. But the price, this constant low-level anxiety, this need for vigilance, was becoming too high. The turning point arrived cloaked in Akiko's signature elegance and reverence for his past. "Tanaka-san," she began one afternoon after class, her voice hushed with respect, "I hope this isn't too forward, but I find myself so deeply fascinated by your former work. The world of Wajima Nuri, it seems almost magical. Would you ever consider, perhaps allowing me a brief visit to your home, just to see the environment where such beautiful restoration took place, to glimpse the tools you used? It would be such an honor, a way to truly appreciate the dedication involved." Kenji felt cornered. Refusing seemed churlish, a violation of the politeness ingrained in him. Yet the thought of her appraising eyes scanning his private space, the dormant workshop that still felt imbued with Emi's quiet presence, filled him with reluctance. He hesitated, searching for a polite excuse. "Oh, please don't feel obligated if it's inconvenient," Akiko added quickly, sensing his hesitation, her expression one of perfect understanding. It was merely a hopeful wish from an admirer of traditional arts. Her apparent deference made refusal even harder. Trapped by the web of social convention she wielded so expertly, he heard himself agreeing. "It is a humble space, Sato-san, mostly unused now. But if you are truly interested, perhaps a brief visit next week?" "Wonderful." Her smile was radiant, but Kenji thought he detected a brief, almost imperceptible flicker of triumph in her eyes before it vanished behind the mask of graceful appreciation. He set a time, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach throughout the following days. When Akiko arrived, she was impeccably dressed, bearing a small, beautifully wrapped gift, expensive senbei rice crackers. She praised the simple elegance of his house, the tranquility of the small garden visible through the veranda doors. Her compliments flowed effortlessly, yet Kenji felt a subtle performative quality to them. He led her to the small workshop. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, hitting the orderly rows of specialized brushes, spatulas, and polishing stones. The faint, phantom scent of urushi seemed to stir in the air. Akiko initially expressed appropriate awe. "Incredible," she breathed, running a delicate finger over a smooth polishing stone. The patience required, the years of accumulated skill. But soon her focus shifted. She picked up a specific type of brush. "These fine brushes, for applying gold powder, weren't they? Maki work is so sought after. Did you do much of that, Tanaka-san?" Her tone was light, conversational. "Some," Kenji replied curtly, beginning to feel like an exhibit himself. Her eyes scanned the shelves. "And the raw lacquer itself, the urushi, properly aged, it must be quite difficult to source now? Very valuable, I imagine?" "Good materials always require effort to find," he said, keeping his voice neutral. She moved towards a set of shallow, lidded bowls, classic wajimanuri shapes, likely pieces he had practiced on or kept for reference. Such perfect form. Are these very old? Did pieces like this, once restored, fetch high prices at galleries? Her gaze lingered on them, sharp and appraising. The admiration felt thin now, a veneer over a core of calculation. Kenji stood very still, Haruito's quiet words about appearances echoing in his mind. He watched Akiko's carefully maintained facade, the elegant posture, the gentle smile, and saw, with sudden irrefutable clarity, the acquisitive hunger beneath. It wasn't the craft she admired, it was the perceived monetary value. She turned back to him, her expression one of thoughtful inquiry. "Tanaka-san, forgive my curiosity, but with your expertise, did you perhaps keep a small personal collection? Any particularly significant pieces you restored over the years? Something with historical importance, perhaps?" The question hung in the quiet air of the workshop, freighted with unspoken assumption. This was it, the culmination of weeks of subtle probing. Kenji met her gaze directly, his own expression calm, revealing nothing of the inner turmoil, the disappointment, the confirmation of his deepest unease. He drew on the lifetime of discipline his craft had taught him, control, precision, stillness. "Sato-san," he said, his voice quiet but firm, devoid of accusation, yet leaving no room for negotiation. "These are just remnants of a past life, old tools, faded memories." He gestured vaguely around the workshop. "I find value in simplicity now. My life is very quiet. These things," he paused, letting the silence underscore his words, "hold little financial interest anymore." For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped entirely. Akiko Sato's refined smile tightened, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. A flicker of sharp disappointment, of frustration, crossed her features before being instantly smoothed away, replaced by an expression of polite understanding. "Ah," she said, her voice a fraction too bright. "Forgive me. How insensitive of me to focus on such worldly matters when it is the spirit of the craft that truly matters. You are quite right, Tanaka-san. Simplicity holds the greatest treasure." But Kenji had seen it. That fleeting glimpse of her honor, the raw calculation beneath the polished tatami. It was all the confirmation he needed. The warmth he had felt towards her evaporated, leaving only a residue of disillusionment and a quiet determination to protect his peace. The rest of the visit was brief. Kenji remained polite but coolly reserved. Akiko, sensing the shift in atmosphere, seemed eager to leave. Her parting words were gracious, but they lacked the earlier warmth. As he slid the gate closed behind her, Kenji felt not anger but a profound weariness, and beneath it a strange sense of relief. The ambiguity was gone. He knew where he stood. He understood the language of subtle withdrawal, a skill as ingrained in his culture as the art of politeness itself. At the next Shodo class, when Akiko approached him with her usual gentle smile, Kenji returned it with a polite nod, but immediately turned his attention to grinding his inkstick, his posture conveying focused absorption. When she attempted to start a conversation after the session, he politely excused himself, murmuring something about needing to get home to attend to a small household matter. He maintained this pattern consistently. He was never rude, never accusatory. He simply became unavailable for the easy intimacy Akiko had cultivated. He arrived just before class started and left promptly afterwards. If their paths crossed, his greetings were brief, formal, his gaze calm but distant. He used the practice itself as a shield, immersing himself in the strokes, finding refuge in the concentration required. Akiko Sato was perceptive. She understood the unspoken message, the gentle but firm closing of a door. After a few attempts to bridge the new distance were met with the same polite reserve, she ceased her efforts. There was no awkward scene, no explanation demanded or offered. She simply redirected her charm and attention elsewhere within the group, her elegant facade firmly back in place. Kenji watched this shift with a detached sense of confirmation, feeling neither triumph nor regret, only a quiet affirmation of his decision. With the underlying tension gone, Kenji found himself relaxing more fully into the rhythm of the Shodo Club. He began to appreciate Haruito's quiet presence more deeply. Their conversations remained simple, observations about the changing light as winter approached, the taste of seasonal pickles, the challenge of achieving a particular brush effect. Yet beneath the surface, there was a growing sense of uncomplicated fellowship, a shared understanding that needed few words. One afternoon, as the first snowflakes began to drift past the community center window, Haru shared a thermos of hot hojicha tea with him. "The first snow," she said, watching the flakes melt on the glass. "It makes everything quiet, doesn't it? Covers up the old leaves, makes the world seem fresh for a moment." Kenji nodded, sipping the roasted tea, its warmth spreading through him. "It does. A clean slate." He looked at Haru's kind, weathered face, appreciating her simple authenticity, the absence of artifice. This connection felt real, grounded, asking nothing more than shared presence. He realized his initial motivation for joining the club, escaping loneliness, had subtly transformed. He still valued the companionship, but he no longer craved it with the same desperate intensity that had made him vulnerable. He had navigated a hidden danger, trusted his instincts, and protected his hard-won peace. The experience hadn't made him bitter, but it had made him wiser, more discerning. Winter settled over Kanazawa. Bare branches etched sharp lines against the grey sky, and the occasional snowfall muffled the city's sounds, deepening the quiet Kenji had once dreaded, but now found restorative. He continued his Shodo practice, both at the club and at home in his quiet workshop, which no longer felt solely like a space of absence. It was becoming a space of contemplation, of rediscovery. He found himself drawn to characters that spoke of his recent experience and newfound state of mind. He practiced drawing Chig, quiet, calm, still, again and again, seeking not just technical perfection but the feeling itself. He worked on Din, Ken Mi, see, look, discern, reflecting on the importance of looking beyond surfaces. He drew Sin, Kok, heart, mind, spirit, contemplating the nature of authenticity. The rhythmic grinding of the ink, the focused breath, the flow of the brush across paper, these became a form of meditation, a way of processing and integrating the lesson learned. His loneliness hadn't vanished entirely, but its character had changed. It was less an oppressive void and more a quiet space for reflection, a familiar landscape he could navigate with greater self-awareness. He understood now that connection couldn't be forced or rushed, and that its true value lay in honesty, not in flattering illusions. The warmth Akiko had offered had been like a firework, bright, captivating, but ultimately fleeting and leaving behind only smoke. The quiet companionship he found with Haru, the shared focus with other club members, was more like the steady warmth of embers, less dazzling perhaps, but enduring and true. He sometimes thought of Akiko, wondering if she had found another target for her subtle manipulations. He felt a pang of pity for her underlying desperation, but no regret for his decision to withdraw. Protecting his own emotional and financial equilibrium had been necessary, an act not of coldness, but of self-respect. One crisp winter morning, sunlight glinting off a fresh layer of snow in his garden, Kenji sat in his workshop. He unrolled a fresh sheet of washi paper, ground his ink with deliberate care, and chose his brush. He wasn't thinking of Akiko or even Emi. He was simply present, aware of the cold air, the scent of ink, the weight of the brush in his hand. He breathed deeply, centered himself, and drew the character, an Yasui, peace, tranquility, contentment. The stroke was steady, balanced, imperfect perhaps, but his own. A quiet sense of satisfaction settled over him, as clean and bright as the winter morning. He had faced the echo of absence and the allure of false connection, and emerged into a clearer understanding of himself and the quiet strength of his own resilience. He was alone, yes, but no longer adrift. He was grounded in the peaceful self-reliance he had reclaimed, open to the quiet, genuine connections that life might still offer, one careful brushstroke at a time. Kenji continued his quiet life, the rhythms of the seasons marking time in Kanazawa. He still attended the Shodo Club, finding solace in the practice and quiet companionship. His interactions with Akiko Sato remained polite but distant. She seemed to have accepted the boundary he had established without confrontation. He felt no animosity towards her, only a lingering sense of caution, a reminder that vulnerability could wear elegant disguises. His friendship with Haru Ito deepened naturally, built on shared cups of tea, quiet observations about the neighborhood, and mutual respect. She never pried, never offered unsolicited advice, but her steady, grounded presence was a source of quiet comfort. Sometimes, after class, he would stop by her small tea shop, enjoying the warmth and the simple, honest exchange. It wasn't the all-encompassing companionship he had shared with Emmy. Nothing could replace that. But it was a genuine connection, adding a welcome touch of warmth to his days. He even found himself speaking more openly, though still reservedly, with his daughter Yumi on their weekly calls. He didn't recount the specifics of his encounter with Akiko. It felt too complex, too nuanced to explain over the phone. But he spoke more about his shoda practice, about Haru's tea shop, about the small details of his life in Kanazawa. Yumi, sensing a subtle shift in his tone, a lessening of the deep melancholy that had worried her, seemed relieved. Their conversations became a little easier, a little less formal. The experience had taught him a valuable lesson, one that resonated with the principles of his former craft. Just as a restorer must look beneath the surface grime and damage to understand the true structure and spirit of a lacquerware piece, so too must one look beyond charming facades and pleasant words to discern the true nature of a person. Patience, observation, and trusting one's instincts were crucial, not just in restoring art, but in navigating the complexities of human relationships, especially when loneliness made one yearn for connection. He didn't become cynical or closed off. He remained open to the possibility of new friendships, but his openness was now tempered with a healthy dose of discernment. He understood that true connection wasn't about finding someone to fill the void left by Emmy, but about building new relationships based on mutual respect, honesty, and shared presence, however quiet or unassuming they might be. His workshop, once dormant, saw occasional activity. He didn't take on new restoration projects, but sometimes, inspired by a particular character or feeling, he would practice his calligraphy there, the familiar space feeling less like a monument to the past and more like a quiet sanctuary for the present. The scent of ink mingled with the phantom scent of urushi, creating a unique fragrance that was entirely his own. He had found a measure of peace, not by erasing the past or ignoring his solitude, but by integrating his experiences and finding contentment within the quiet, independent rhythm of his life. The brush moved, the ink flowed, and Kenji Tanaka, grounded and discerning, continued to write his own story, one tranquil stroke at a time. Current part characters, 3D7 Hora 1, total characters, 2,994. He found a quiet joy in the small details. The precise way the winter plum blossoms unfolded against the branches outside his window, the satisfying texture of good washi paper beneath his brush, the warmth of Haru's teapot warming his hands on a cold afternoon. These simple, tangible realities anchored him. The drama with Akiko faded, becoming not a source of lingering bitterness, but a catalyst for growth, a stark lesson learned in the late autumn of his life. He realized that independence didn't have to mean isolation. It meant having the clarity and strength to choose one's connections wisely, to protect one's emotional space, and to find contentment within oneself, regardless of external validation. The Shodo practice continued to be central. It taught him about balance, not just in the composition of characters, but in life itself. The balance between openness and caution, between remembering the past and living in the present, between solitude and connection. Sometimes, while grinding the inkstick, the rhythmic motion would lull him into reflection. He thought about the layers of lacquer in Wajima Nuri, each layer painstakingly applied, dried and polished, invisible in the final piece, yet essential to its depth and resilience. Perhaps life, too, was like that. Experiences, joys, sorrows, even deceptions. They were all layers contributing to the person one became. Akiko's chapter, though unsettling, was now simply another layer, one that had, paradoxically, strengthened his own inner core, revealing a resilience he hadn't known he possessed. He never sought to warn others about Akiko directly. It wasn't his nature, nor did he feel it his place within the quiet dynamics of the group. He trusted that others, too, possessed their own discernment. His responsibility, he felt, was to his own integrity, his own peace. And in maintaining that, he found a quiet strength that radiated outwards in its own subtle way. His calm presence, his dedication to the art, his gentle interactions with Haru, these perhaps served as their own quiet example. The story ends not with a grand resolution, but with a quiet continuation. Kenji Tanaka, the meticulous craftsman, the lonely widower, had navigated the treacherous waters of vulnerability and emerged not unscathed, but whole. He embraced the quiet rhythm of his days in Kanazawa, his life a testament to the enduring power of resilience, the wisdom gained through quiet observation, and the profound peace found in authenticity. The brush dips into the ink, ready for the next stroke.